I never considered myself a romantic. Online dating was a convenience, a way to meet people without the awkwardness of face-to-face interactions. When I matched with Clara, it felt different. Her profile was enticing, filled with pictures of her traveling, hiking, and living life to the fullest. Our conversations flowed effortlessly, making me believe in the possibility of genuine connection. After weeks of chatting, we decided to meet in person. Clara suggested a quaint coffee shop downtown, one of those places with dim lighting and vintage decor. I arrived early, nervous yet excited. The barista's smile did little to calm my nerves as I ordered a coffee and settled into a corner booth. I watched the door, every chime of the bell making my heart race. When Clara walked in, she was even more stunning in person. Her dark hair cascaded over her shoulders, and her eyes sparkled with mischief. She greeted me with a warm hug, her touch sending shivers down my spine. We spent hours talking, losing track of time. She was everything I had hoped for and more. As the evening wore on, Clara suggested we go for a walk. The streets were eerily quiet, the streetlights casting long shadows. We wandered aimlessly, talking about our hopes and dreams. Clara's hand brushed against mine and she smiled, her teeth gleaming in the dim light. It felt surreal, like a scene from a movie. "Do you believe in fate?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, unsure of what to say. Her eyes seemed to pierce through me, making me feel vulnerable and exposed. "I think we were meant to meet," she continued, her hand now gripping mine tightly. "There's something special about you." Her words were intoxicating, filling me with a sense of euphoria. We continued walking until we reached a secluded park. The playground equipment creaked in the wind, and the trees rustled ominously. Clara led me to a bench, and we sat down, her head resting on my shoulder. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice trembling. "I haven't been completely honest with you." My heart sank. I tried to pull away, but Clara's grip tightened. "Please, just listen," she pleaded, her eyes wide with fear. "I've been followed for weeks. I don't know who they are, but they're always there, watching me." A chill ran down my spine. I scanned the park, but we appeared to be alone. Clara's fear was palpable, and I felt a surge of protectiveness. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I didn't want to scare you away," she admitted, tears streaming down her face. "I thought if I could just be with someone, it would stop. But they're here, I can feel it." A sense of dread settled over me. Clara's fear was contagious, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I stood up, pulling her with me. "We need to go," I said, my voice firm. "Let's get out of here." We hurried through the park, the shadows seeming to close in around us. Clara clung to me, her breath coming in ragged gasps. I could feel her trembling, and I quickened our pace. As we reached the edge of the park, I glanced back, and my blood ran cold. A figure stood beneath a streetlight, watching us. Their face was obscured by a hood, and they made no move to follow us. But their presence was enough to send me into a panic. I pulled Clara into a nearby alley, hoping to lose our pursuer. "We need to get to my car," I whispered, my heart pounding in my chest. "It's just a few blocks away." Clara nodded, her eyes wide with terror. We moved quickly, the sound of our footsteps echoing off the walls. The streets were deserted, and every shadow seemed to hold a hidden threat. As we turned a corner, my car came into view. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. The hooded figure was standing next to it, their head tilted as if they were studying us. Panic surged through me, and I looked around desperately for another way out. "This way," Clara whispered, tugging me towards a narrow side street. We sprinted down the alley, our footsteps echoing in the confined space. I could hear the figure behind us, their footsteps methodical and unhurried. We emerged onto another street, and I spotted a small, rundown motel. It wasn't ideal, but it was shelter. We dashed inside, the bell above the door jingling loudly. The receptionist looked up, startled by our sudden entrance. "Can I help you?" she asked, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. "Please, we need a room," I panted, glancing nervously at the door. "Just for the night." She hesitated, but the desperation in my voice must have convinced her. She handed me a key, and we hurried down the dimly lit hallway. Our room was small and dingy, but it felt like a sanctuary compared to the dark streets outside. Clara collapsed onto the bed, her body shaking with sobs. I locked the door and pulled a chair in front of it, hoping it would provide some semblance of security. I sat next to Clara, wrapping my arms around her. "It's okay," I whispered, trying to calm her. "We're safe now." But deep down, I wasn't sure. The figure's relentless pursuit had left me unnerved, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still being watched. As the night wore on, we kept the lights on, too afraid to sleep. Every creak and groan of the building sent us into a fresh wave of panic. I could see the exhaustion in Clara's eyes, and I knew we couldn't keep this up forever. In the early hours of the morning, just as the first light of dawn began to seep through the curtains, there was a soft knock on the door. We froze, staring at each other in horror. "Who is it?" I called out, my voice trembling. No answer. The knock came again, more insistent this time. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. Clara grabbed my arm, her eyes pleading with me not to open the door. I took a deep breath and moved the chair aside, my hand shaking as I reached for the doorknob. As I opened the door a crack, I peered out into the hallway. There was no one there. A sense of relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by dread. I shut the door and turned back to Clara, my mind racing. "We need to leave," I said, my voice firm. "Now." Clara nodded, and we gathered our things quickly. As we stepped out into the hallway, the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. We made our way to the lobby, where the receptionist was dozing at her desk. She barely glanced at us as we hurried past. The streets were empty, and the sun was just beginning to rise. We made our way back to my car, my eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of the hooded figure. But there was nothing. As we drove away, the tension in the car was palpable. Clara was silent, staring out the window with a haunted look in her eyes. I reached over and took her hand, hoping to provide some comfort. "We'll figure this out," I promised, my voice filled with determination. "We'll find out who they are and make them stop." Clara nodded, but her expression remained distant. The events of the night had taken their toll, and I knew it would be a long time before either of us felt safe again. As we drove into the horizon, the sense of unease lingered. The hooded figure might not have caught us that night, but their presence had left a permanent mark. We were forever changed, bound by a shared terror that would haunt us for the rest of our lives. I never imagined that a simple swipe could lead to something so sinister. It started innocently enough, like many modern romances do. I was scrolling through profiles on a dating app, half interested, when I came across Emily. Her profile was unassuming. A few pictures of her at the beach, a brief bio mentioning her love for animals and hiking. There was something about her eyes, though, that drew me in. They seemed kind, genuine. We matched, and our conversation flowed easily. She was funny, engaging, and we quickly moved from the app to texting. After a couple of weeks, we decided to meet in person. Emily suggested a small, out-of-the-way diner in a neighboring town. It seemed like an odd choice, but I agreed, eager to see her. The drive to the diner was longer than I expected, and the scenery became increasingly desolate. By the time I arrived, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the empty parking lot. The diner's neon sign flickered, and I felt a shiver run down my spine as I parked my car. Inside, the diner was nearly empty. A couple of truckers sat at the counter, nursing cups of coffee. Emily was already there, sitting in a booth by the window. She waved me over, her smile warm and inviting. "I'm glad you came," she said as I slid into the seat across from her. "Me too," I replied, though the unease from the drive lingered. We ordered food, and the conversation flowed easily. Emily was just as charming in person as she had been online. Still, something felt off. Maybe it was the eeriness of the nearly deserted diner, or the way the staff seemed to watch us with an unsettling intensity. Halfway through our meal, Emily excused herself to use the restroom. As I waited, I noticed a man sitting at the counter staring at me. His gaze was intense, almost predatory. I tried to ignore it, focusing instead on my half-eaten burger. Minutes passed, and Emily still hadn't returned. Growing worried, I decided to check on her. I approached the restroom, but as I reached for the door, the man from the counter stepped in front of me, blocking my path. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "You should leave," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Now." "What are you talking about?" I demanded, my heart pounding in my chest. She's not who you think she is, he replied, his eyes narrowing. Get out while you still can. Before I could respond, the restroom door opened and Emily stepped out. She smiled at me, but it didn't reach her eyes. The man glared at her before turning and walking away. Everything okay? Emily asked, her voice sweet but with an edge that made my skin crawl. Yeah, just let's get out of here, I said, trying to hide my unease. We left the diner, and as we walked to our cars, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Emily insisted we go for a drive, claiming she knew a scenic route that would take us back to town. Reluctantly, I agreed, hoping to put some distance between us and the strange encounter at the diner. As we drove, the landscape grew even more remote. Trees lined the narrow road, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out the moonlight. Emily chatted away, but I could barely focus on her words. My mind kept drifting back to the man's warning. Suddenly, Emily's demeanor shifted. She turned to me, her eyes cold and calculating. You seem tense, she said, her voice losing its earlier warmth. Just tired, I lied, gripping the steering wheel tighter. Why don't we pull over for a bit? She suggested, a sinister smile playing on her lips. I'd rather just get back to town, I replied, my unease growing. Pull over, she repeated, her tone leaving no room for argument. Against my better judgment, I complied. We stopped on the side of the road, surrounded by darkness. Emily's smile widened as she reached into her purse, pulling out a small silver object. My blood ran cold as I realized it was a knife. What are you doing? I asked, my voice trembling. Teaching you a lesson, she said, her eyes gleaming with malice. You should have listened to that man in the diner. Before I could react, she lunged at me, the blade glinting in the faint light. I fought back, adrenaline surging through me. We struggled in the confined space of the car, and I managed to knock the knife from her hand. Desperation drove me, and I kicked open the door, tumbling out onto the gravel. I scrambled to my feet and ran, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I could hear Emily behind me, her footsteps quick and determined. The trees seemed to close in around me, but I pushed forward, driven by sheer terror. I stumbled onto another road, nearly collapsing with relief when I saw headlights approaching. I waved frantically, and the car screeched to a halt. The driver, an older man with a kind face, rolled down his window. Help me, I pleaded, my voice breaking. Get in, he said, his tone urgent. I clambered into the car, slamming the door shut just as Emily emerged from the trees. The driver sped away, leaving her standing in the road, her face twisted in fury. As we drove away, I explained what had happened. The driver listened, his expression growing more concerned with each word. He took me to the nearest police station, where I recounted the night's events to the officers. They took my statement and promised to investigate. Days passed and I couldn't shake the fear that had settled in my bones. I deleted the dating app and changed my phone number, desperate to put the experience behind me. But the nightmares persisted, and I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder. A week later, I received a call from the police. They had found Emily's car abandoned in the woods, but there was no sign of her. The man from the diner was nowhere to be found either. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. The officers assured me that they would continue to search, but their words did little to ease my mind. I knew that Emily was still out there, somewhere, and that she wouldn't stop until she found me. The fear never truly left. I moved to a new town, started a new job, and tried to rebuild my life. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily's cold, calculating smile. And every time I walked down a dark street, I could feel her presence, lurking just out of sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. In the end, the lesson was clear. Some matches are better left unswiped. Dating apps had become a routine for me. Swipe, chat, meet, repeat. Most of the time, it led to nothing more than a few awkward conversations and one-off dates. But when I matched with Olivia, things felt different. Her profile was simple. A few pictures of her smiling at different locations, a brief bio about her love for photography and hiking. She had an aura of mystery that intrigued me. Our chats were engaging, and soon enough, we arranged to meet. Olivia suggested a hiking trip. It seemed fitting, given her interests, and I was eager for an adventure. We decided on a trail a couple of hours away, known for its picturesque views and seclusion. I didn't think twice about the remoteness. I was too excited to finally meet her. The morning of our hike was clear and bright. I packed my gear and set off early, arriving at the trailhead ahead of schedule. Olivia was already there, leaning against her car. She was even more striking in person, with a presence that seemed to command attention effortlessly. "Hey," she greeted, her smile lighting up her face. "Ready for this?" "Absolutely," I replied, trying to match her enthusiasm. We started our hike, the trail winding through dense woods. The conversation flowed easily at first, covering the usual topics of work, hobbies, and travel. Olivia was a great storyteller, and I found myself hanging on her every word. As we ventured deeper into the forest, the path grew narrower and less distinct. The trees seemed to close in around us, and a heavy silence fell over the woods. I noticed that Olivia had grown quieter, her focus shifting to the trail ahead. "Are we still on the right path?" I asked, glancing around uncertainly. "Trust me, I know this place like the back of my hand," she replied, a strange intensity in her voice. We continued, but my unease grew with each step. The dense foliage made it hard to see far ahead, and the air felt thick and oppressive. Suddenly, Olivia stopped and turned to me, her expression unreadable. "I need to show you something," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. She led me off the main trail, through a tangle of underbrush and over a small ridge. We emerged into a small clearing, dominated by an old, dilapidated cabin. Its windows were boarded up, and the wood was rotting, giving it an eerie, abandoned feel. "What is this place?" I asked, a sense of dread settling in my stomach. "It's a special spot," Olivia replied, her eyes fixed on the cabin. "Come on, let's take a look inside." Reluctantly, I followed her to the door. It creaked open, revealing a dark interior that smelled of decay and damp wood. The floorboards groaned under our weight as we stepped inside. Dust motes floated in the air, caught in the weak sunlight filtering through the cracks. "Why are we here?" My voice echoing in the empty space. She didn't answer. Instead, she moved to the center of the room, where a trapdoor was hidden beneath a layer of debris. She cleared it away and pulled the door open, revealing a set of stairs leading down into darkness. "Come with me," she said, descending the stairs without hesitation. Every instinct screamed at me to turn and run, but curiosity and a strange compulsion drove me to follow. The stairs creaked ominously as I descended, and the air grew colder, carrying a faint metallic smell. At the bottom, I found myself in a small, dimly lit basement. The walls were lined with old photographs, each one depicting a different person. I moved closer, my blood running cold as I recognized faces from Olivia's social media, people she had claimed were friends or family. "What is this?" I asked, my voice shaking. "These are my memories," Olivia replied, her eyes distant. "Everyone who comes here leaves a part of themselves behind." I took a step back, my heart pounding. "I think I should go." Olivia's expression darkened, her eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "You're not leaving." She lunged at me, and I stumbled back, my hand catching on one of the photographs. It came off the wall, revealing a small compartment behind it. Inside was a collection of items, jewelry, watches, trinkets. I realized with horror that these were trophies. "Who are you?" I demanded, fear overtaking my voice. Olivia's smile was cold, devoid of any warmth. "I'm someone who collects stories, and now you're part of mine." Panic surged through me, and I turned to run, but she was faster. She grabbed my arm, her grip like a vice. I struggled, but her strength was overwhelming. Desperation fueled my actions, and I lashed out, knocking her back. I bolted up the stairs, not daring to look back. The cabin seemed to close in on me, the walls narrowing as I sprinted for the door. I burst into the sunlight, gasping for air, and didn't stop running until I reached the trailhead. I jumped into my car and sped away, my hands shaking on the wheel. I didn't stop until I was back in the safety of my apartment, the events of the day replaying in my mind like a nightmare. I deleted the dating app, blocked Olivia's number, and tried to convince myself it had all been a terrible dream. But the fear lingered, gnawing at me. Every night, I checked my locks twice, and every shadow seemed to hide a threat. I knew Olivia was still out there, somewhere, watching, waiting, and I knew that no matter how far I ran, I could never truly escape the story I had become a part of.